Hi all, this is Daisy. So the right side is going to stay paused and the left side is going to play. Alright?
I wanted to talk to you about part 2 of the death conversation. It was well received, which I was surprised at. I guess we're all a little bit more ghoulish than I thought. But it's a very important subject to my heart because I see this on the news a lot, where people are asked to believe that a person died alone in suspicious circumstances when they either have a very dangerous person in their immediate family, or they have some sort of unsavory person in their business family. Sometimes it's an unsavory person in their kids' dating histories. Sometimes their children themselves are a little bit too interested in things. Remember, the main motives for crime are always the same. They're money, mostly. Money. Really, chercher l'argent is a very popular phrase in France, and it's certainly true for crime. And passion, love, unrequited love that's not working out for someone, or the prospect, because it usually comes down to money as well. So then you have to look at the prospect of someone else on the horizon causing crime. And also, hate, the opposite of love, causes a lot of crime. And hate can be well hidden, both in families, unfortunately, and in life, business, and other things. You may think that you know how someone feels about you, but you may not actually be aware of the true extent of their feelings for you, or lack thereof. And sometimes it's helpful. So if you're in a position of some importance, you might want to regularly hire a private investigator to kind of investigate these issues and see how your current situation is stacking up. Because you can never undo a dangerous situation once it starts. It's going to have to play out the way it starts, so you have to go ahead and keep yourself out of them by being smart. Being smart is always best. And those really are the two most important things when it comes to crime: money and passion. The third is something that's near and dear to my heart, but it's sort of hard to explain to people in a politically correct way these days, and that is mental illness. The third factor in crime, because antisocial personality disorder is considered an emotional disturbance by most people, it is not those people would get like special ed services in school, for example. You should know that. And it's a factor hidden in many relationships and the politically incorrect part is that you can usually find it by looking around the individual in their blood relatives. If there's a blood relative that has, what do you call it? I forget what you call it, flagrant, I guess, mental illness, then you can expect that some of their relatives do as well, even if it seems like they don't. And it is not wise to take that into account when planning your families and when planning your relationships, also when planning your business dealings. Peel it all back. I'm going to go back through the amount of, there's a many more that I hadn't mentioned before, of situations where the death could be made to look like an accident, but is actually the cause of domestic violence. So, you know how you say interstate to go between states and intrastate within the state? So we're going to say interfamilies and intrafamilies, right? So domestic violence inside the home and outside with immediate people in the environment, like boyfriends, girlfriends, dates, affair partners, whatever. So we want to talk about intrafamily violence, but not the actual violence. That's up to y'all to decide whether your situation warrants that kind of fear or not. I can't do that for you in this discussion. We're talking about accidents, things that look like accidents, that are put down to accidents, whether it's in the news or in your life or whatever, that seem like they are accidental, but for many reasons could be actually domestic violence or violence from another person in your immediate violent environment, whether it's family or business related. Okay? And the only reason I say that is because I can't really think of any other instances where there could be someone that wishes you harm outside of these reasons. So just like before, when I mentioned that people can be extracted from their environment on purpose for reasons of money or reasons of evasion, and for reasons of like wanting to change their gender or their names or identity, okay? Those are good reasons to end your identity, and a lot of times they choose to do that from the outside in some sort of accidental or on purpose way that frequently will get featured on the news to publicize it, and often will result in some sort of sensational reporting, okay? Those are not the crimes I'm talking about here. But because some people have to explain themselves in these ways, they choose some of these ways to explain it. So when you see a news article about someone that seems like they have been unalived or method, then you have to ask yourself if that's really what happened or not, or if you're believing a bunch of bullshit, which sometimes we all do. In some very famous cases also. So I guess I'll leave with this. It's going to be kind of in the middle, but I want you to remember that the police get a bad rap a lot of the time, especially in certain very well publicized cases, because they are participating in these things. Now, I don't think they get money necessarily directly for these kinds of things. I don't know how. They probably get a tip or something. But I wouldn't think that they would be doing anything criminal themselves necessarily in helping these people. They're usually doing it altruistically. That means from a good, motive. And it can be that they get blamed in the news. Perhaps they don't do enough. Someone thinks they're not doing enough to investigate something, or they are blamed for causing a problem sometimes, or they are blamed for being obstructive in delivering a final solution to the public, okay? And sometimes they do, and I'll talk about that towards the end, because there's very well-known situations where they have actually completed an investigation, and then different things happen which imply that perhaps it wasn't ever real to begin with, or maybe it was just to keep the public informed. But in other words, what I'm saying is the police get blamed unfairly blamed a lot of the time for things that aren't really their fault. They're usually told to do something. Now, I'm not saying that they always do. I'm not that far pro-police, although I am pro-police. I'm just saying that that's common. That a lot of the situations where you see people picketing the police department are probably due to these three reasons of money, prosecution, identification, and not due to some sort of egregious action that's kind of ridiculous on the face of the police department. But it can be, because everyone makes mistakes. And the police hiring practices are something that I would like to go into in another video, but probably not this one. Hunting accidents are one way in which any situation where three people go do something and only two come back, or more, or all of them, those are very key in being the kind of accidental deaths that lead themselves to probably being maybe domestic violence, maybe sort of accident.
It's like unintentional comedy. Yeah, y'all, it's so crazy. Christian, when I first got here, he was trying to move his coding onto me, and he started accusing me of doing all kinds of weird things with Norbert. It's just really weird, but it cracks me up. Hold on one second. Or he pantomimed doing that. And since I'm so used to people doing that anyway, it kind of just freaks me out, really. Okay.
Accident at all. Hunters hunt. Guns are not that unsafe in Daisycakes' view. I do not believe myself that people of the time people know how to use them if they have them, and they usually treat them with a lot of respect. So if something bad happens, it's not usually the fault of the weapon. It's usually due to one of those three reasons that I've mentioned. If it isn't, I mean, it's hard to explain. Misfires generally kill the person shooting the gun. So those kinds of deaths especially can be unalivements, or they can be fake self-inflicted wounds that are further domestic violence. So domestic violence has reached the ultimate point, right, of taking someone's life. And when it's not due to a misfire, which is often put down to poor cleaning of a weapon or a gun, I guess you're not a weapon in that case, I don't know. Hunting, they use weird words for I'm going to call them all weapons, okay? But they're usually put down to poor cleaning or poor maintenance, both of which are highly unlikely in professional and people that hunt on a regular basis. Okay, these people are crazy for this thing. They plan all year to do it. It would be really unusual for them to just sort of be sloppy about their weapons. But it does happen, just not as much as people think.
I'm trying to find a good pause here. Okay.
That includes crossbows, especially children. Children dying in these kinds of accidents, especially if they're out in the middle of nowhere, are often a result of trying to cover up physical or sexual abuse, but not always. Don't come for Daisycakes. It's a fair thing to wonder about, right? So they should be investigated along both lines, in my opinion. They should be treated as a domestic violence. It is domestic violence, y'all. This is what makes Daisycakes just like lose her mind, okay? When you die inside your own home, that is domestic violence. There are causes to that. There are perpetrators of that. And you have to look at it as that, okay? So if you're out in the middle of nowhere, calling it not domestic violence just because someone dies and it gets upgraded makes Daisycakes absolutely crazy in her head. Because the situation got to that point because of other domestic violence in the past. Don't doubt it, okay? Don't treat it like it's nothing. Hold on. So when they do happen, there should be a...
Y'all, this is the Stalker adding noises. I'm so freaked out. Hold on one second. What is going on?
They're just trying to put it down to something accidental, okay? So that could be a clue for you to take these things with a grain of salt. However, Daisycakes has noticed that in the news sometimes people don't go back and ask themselves if the siblings of these people are also being abused, because it's abuse to die in your own home of anything that's not natural causes, okay? And so it's domestic abuse to die in your own home of anything that's not a natural cause, in my opinion. And it has, just like domestic violence, it has a beginning point and sort of an acceleration or aggravation of the situation and an ending point. All of those points need to be investigated because it could be affecting more people in the environment than you realize, which is so important now.
In other words, when someone dies of one of these accidental deaths, they could be covering up physical abuse, and dying violently inside your own home, even if it's supposedly by an accident, indicates that the home itself may be unsafe and that there could have been prior incidents of domestic violence that led up to this point, and they should be investigated among all of the members of the family as potential indicators that there's a problem that could resurface or harm other people. I guess. I hope that makes sense. I just get upset because all murders are the ultimate sacrifice that these victims make in trying to cover up things for their parents or their relatives, and it just seems so unfair that we don't treat it as sort of not a, you know how they talk about precursors to domestic violence. Well, death is certainly a postcursor of domestic violence, and it should be investigated as such.
Don't understand why they get ended. Like, why people always talk about a murder, but they don't talk about the domestic violence aspect of the murder. Okay? So I just want to say that before I go on, because it's a big soapbox of mine. And when I get on soapboxes, I don't use scripts. Okay? I just have like one word notes. And so I want to go off on a tangent later about this. So I want just to mention it first. So just understand that any accident that happens in and around the home or via family members, to me, I consider to be domestic violence, and that it's a bigger problem than just that event, and it should be investigated as such. Okay. So hunting accidents, crossbows also. Y'all kids get crossbows all the time. They're extremely powerful. Those springs in the crossbows are under incredible amounts of pressure, and they deliver a lot of force. They are not a toy. They can severely injure your household pets. They can injure lots of things. And you have to treat them responsibly and lock them up just like you would a gun. Okay? A lot of people don't so much. You have to have a trigger lock, and you have to lock it up. Both of those are best. And I'm personally not always in favor of disassembling the weapon when you lock it up, because then you do have to use it, and sometimes in a hurry. But I would say that where kids are concerned, you might want to consider disassembling the weapon as well. But I would understand if you didn't want to, because it does kind of give you things. And also, don't be surprised when people have... Oh, another thing I want to say, just a little PSA, take responsibility for your lives, y'all, and your children's lives, and ask people before you go over their house if they have dangerous substances, or including alcohol, but also, I mean, just anything. And guns or weapons, however you want to put it, available without protection. Because a lot of people these days, they don't have kids in their home, and they might leave things out without realizing it, whether it be aspirin or, a gun. You just don't know until you ask. So ask them. Go ahead and put that little flea in their ear and ask them to say, hey, before I bring little Timmy or Susie over, is everything at your house pretty much locked up, or what? And see what they say. Okay, so hunting accidents. Guns in the home. I'm not a big fan of guns. So funny. But I've shot guns before. I don't mind them. I'm not afraid of them. I don't think that they're bad. I don't think that they're inherently awful. I think if we didn't have guns, we would still, hit or punch or hurt each other, bludgeon or whatever people do. When they're angry, people will do all kinds of things without thinking impulsively. And it's true that the fewer lethal weapons that they have available to them, the better. But anything can be a lethal weapon if you feel that way about someone. This is why I started out by saying that your most important thing that you have to do is forensically look at your life and extricate yourself from any dangerous people therein. Okay? However, gun accidents do happen. It's possible that, like I said, you might wander into someone's house and your child might find a loaded gun somewhere if they don't have kids usually or whatever. People can come over to a house with loaded weapons without you knowing that they have them, and then can leave them out, and that can lead to problems too, and that you cannot protect yourself. Guns are perfectly legal, y'all. You have to think of it like, the way I look at it is like a purse, okay? If we had purses that exploded, and just think about how many purses are at a party. and where they end up, and what people do with them, and whether they pay attention to them, and whether they know where they are. And to a lot of people, carrying a weapon is the same thing. They may go to a party and put the weapon down in the holster on the bed with the coat and the purse. It's perfectly possible. So you just have to kind of be aware. My best advice is to get a babysitter for every party where you don't know the people. And then if you like the people, then the next time, little Susie and Tony can go. But you have to take responsibility for your own family safety, and you just cannot underestimate that how much other people can think differently about you, about everything, okay? Almost nobody agrees with me about most things, and it hasn't changed me feeling that way, because I believe everybody's entitled to feel however they feel. And I'm telling you how I feel, just in case you might not have ever heard this kind of point of view before, and no one's talked to you this way. Someone needs to talk to you this way, because the news is telling us that we have a real problem with these things in our country, and a lot of it has to do with our perception that the problem is not inside our own homes, it is outside. And I'm telling you that it might be a lot closer to you than you think. So think about it like a purse. When you go to Denny's, you see lots of purses everywhere, on the floor, on the tables, on people's arms, under their coats. I mean, they just sling them around. They put them in their trunks. They have them on their seat next to them in the car. They have them in a little pocket next to the door. They sometimes leave them on the roof of their car when they're driving around. I mean, they're everywhere, y'all. And if you start looking at a gun like a purse, you might understand better how responsible you have to be in your own environment, to know what's in your environment when your kids are around, especially, and how many people come in and out that might think differently than you do about these situations. Now, you shouldn't be paranoid about it. And the only key to it is if your kids are going to be present at any place, that you supervise them assiduously. Okay? And your teenagers need to be fully educated in these things in the same way that I'm educating y'all as much as I can. And you need to understand the picture of life, okay? A party is like a gas station. People pull into the outside of the party. People go into the party. People leave the party. Strangers arrive at the party. Like, it's a big deal, y'all. And these days, we can't be too sure that someone hasn't taken their dad's gun or borrowed something from someone. And so the guns aren't dangerous, y'all. They really aren't. People can be dangerous, and that is where you need to start looking at dangerous people, the red people in your life. You need to ask yourself, the more red people that show up at a party, the more likely it is that something could happen. If there's only one or two, like I said before, you should watch my behavior video for kids. But like I said before, you might be the red person in a situation. Then you have a lot more control, because you know your friends and what they're likely to bring with them, and you know that you might be the person that people are afraid of, and you can manage that better for yourself. But if you're a green person, then you need to educate yourself about what goes on in your environment, and you need to ask yourself these questions about money and passion and control and power, and find out who has it, and understand that those people have ways of protecting themselves that they take with them everywhere they go. And to imply that they don't is naive, and we can't afford to be naive in our situations. We just don't want to be paranoid, okay? Because like I say, if it's like a purse, a gun, Jimmy. If a gun is on the table and there's no dangerous people around the table, then the gun is not dangerous. If there's a child present, the gun is dangerous. If there's any one of the people I've described before around, then the gun is dangerous. A mentally ill person with mental illness, or a upset person, or a person that feels like they don't have power or love or money or control. Those people render the situation more difficult. So it's a lot easier and more effective to focus on the people and less on the equipment, okay? So the only thing I would say about crossbows, is to bring it back, is to say that crossbows are extremely serious on a number of levels. The spring in a crossbow can kill a child, even if it's not firing a weapon. You should be really careful with them. They're very effective hunting things, so as long as they're used humanely. I don't have a problem with humane hunting. I have a lot of problems with unskilled hunting. Trail accidents. Y'all, this is a big deal to me, and this is going to be another warning for y'all because it implies things that you may not have thought about, and I know it's going to upset you probably, but trail accidents are a thing because people with certain mental illnesses don't realize that they are not in a good environment for themselves. They don't feel cold and heat. They don't feel hunger and pain like you and I do. So they don't have the same reactions that you and I do to things. And these people, when they become feral, they only think about meeting their needs. So they don't think about social niceties or non-violent approaches to making friends and things like that. They don't have that brain ability, okay? So you need to understand that when you go out on these trails by yourself, you're going to be interacting with at least a few people that don't approach the world like you do. Okay? If they're hungry, they're going to take your food. If they're cold, they're going to take your blankets. If they're poor, they're going to take your money. And if they want sex, they're probably going to try to attack you. And they may hold you hostage for several days. They may unalive you. Then you should be aware of them. You can't control the environment around you when you're in the great outdoors by yourselves. That's why it's never a good idea to travel by yourself. And I've gone into that in my other video, okay? But I wanted to make it clear to you because a lot of the time, like I said, the criminal mind believes that the best way to get away with something is strangeness. And sometimes that's because that's the only thing that they have. They don't have anything else, okay? And when they're out in the elements and all niceties have been stripped from them, that's how they survive. It's not like the Old West. Everybody always makes these stupid comparisons, no offense, but it's not like the Old West. It's not like anything. It's like, and you can't compare people to animals, right? So I'm just trying to make you understand, this is the primitive brain. This is brain cortex only. This is not any kind of frontal lobe or parietal lobe activity. There's nothing going on in the front, in the middle, okay? It's only the back, the core of the brain that wants to live, that sees other people as an enemy, that wants to eat, it wants to mate, they want to be sheltered, and they will do anything to achieve that. And it's a sad situation. Those people have family members somewhere in the world, and I'll tell you my solution for homelessness in another video, but it has to do with that. And the only thing you can really do is ensure that you have methods of protecting yourself. You need a satellite phone. You need some sort of effective physical deterrent, something that strikes something, no matter what that is for you. You need some sort of flare and a siren, and maybe one of those signals that transmits, like a boat has, that transmits wherever you are to some emergency beacon, okay? You cannot responsibly travel without those things and expect to be okay. You just can't. And it's irresponsible. That's what I was trying to say before. It's irresponsible of people to put all of the weight of their survival on first responders when these things are readily available to you for just a few more dollars than you were going to spend anyway, okay? And that's true no matter where you go. If you go in a car or in a tent or on skis or whatever, you need to have those things. I forgot to mention them before, so I just wanted to mention them also. It's as vital as food and water to have those things. And if you can't afford those things, then you shouldn't go. And that's the part of growing up that's really hard for people. And that's why we end up with all of these weird recipes and things, and that's sad. And part of that much attention that you pay to your backpack when you're packing it, you should pay to the people that go with you, okay? You don't want someone that's just going to turn around and run away when something scary happens. And you don't want someone that's going to be a jerk and join in, right? Because that happens to some of these women. And you don't want someone that's going to plan the whole thing and have some, big ugly waiting for you halfway down the trail because they want your inheritance or whatever it is, okay? So you have to take responsibility for yourselves in those ways. So that's what I would say. I don't want to get preachy, but I just want to make it clear because, like I said, I have daughters, and even though they don't talk to me today, I do try to teach people in general, hoping that it will filter down to them at some point, that these things are important because I taught them to worry about their physical safety and to be appropriately prepared for situations. But I had to learn that the hard way myself. So, trail accidents. The next one is bodies found outside. Now we're reverting back to, that was, there's two approaches. One is things you can do something about before it starts, which is, you'll hear me, like the trail accidents, talking about that part of it. This is what you do when it pops up on the news, okay? The skepticism that you bring to something. And the one thing I would say about the trail accidents, and this is a trigger warning for families, anybody's ever had anybody involved in it, these people don't die quickly. They don't die pleasantly. They don't die quickly. These people want companionship, and that's how they get it. So you really don't want to fall into these situations. It's not like when you see the person, you can just walk past them and pretend like you didn't see them, okay? It's important that you know that because no one else will tell you that. On the news, it always says, oh, they died right away or whatever. But sometimes people don't. And when you're in this situation, it's too late to know how it's going to go. So that's why I tell you ahead of time that you need to have it, and you don't need, I'm telling you that when you're walking down that trail, you need to have a flare in your hand, not in your backpack. Okay? And you need to have a watch that has a beacon on it that you can press the button of that will transmit something to someone in that moment or something around your neck or whatever. And you need to think very carefully about your actual fitness levels before you go farther away than you can with one of those. Okay? So that's all I was saying, is that if you're in a situation, whatever you would use to defend yourself has to be in your hand. And I have personal feelings about these things, which is why I'm okay with guns. Because, like pepper spray for women, a lot of the times throwing it at them and turning around and running would be a lot better than trying to stand there and spray something on them. Seriously, don't do that. I mean, do that if that's what your family tells you to do, okay? But, I mean, you can go all the way up to bear spray all you want to. And yes, it does work if the person's nice enough just to stand there and let you spray them. But most of the time, people aren't. And remember, because this is my thing, because my brother is 6'6", okay? His wingspan, I don't even know, what is it, like 40 feet? I mean, it's crazy. And his legs are also the same as his wingspan, y'all. So if he were ever mad at someone, like a 5-foot-tall woman, and she turned around to run, he could close that distance in less than a full step. Do you understand that? If she was 20 feet away from him, he could reach her with his arms in no time at all. And we don't tell our kids, and we need to. We need to do demonstrations of that without the person just standing there and being nice about it when they get sprayed with pepper spray. It's not realistic. So that's why I'm saying you need to have, if you're walking in the middle of the wilderness, you need to have a flare in your hand at all times. You need to be ready to send messages to people. And you need to understand that if something happens to you and you're in the middle of nowhere, your likelihood of survival is extremely slim and probably won't happen. So you should be ready, okay? The risks, it's like skydiving. Why don't we understand that about anything else? You know, it's really funny. So without being macabre, just understand that people that are bad people know their intentions for you better than you do. And the chances of you actually being able to convince them that you knowing them and seeing their face and walking away is a good thing, I mean, that's not going to happen. And people's unreliable family members and dangerous acquaintances can turn into these kinds of people just like that. Which means that going in a car with them could be like skydiving, or going away to a national park with them could be like skydiving. I mean, you just don't know. They don't really see it that way, but it is the same. Anything that goes wrong, that you have less control once things start going wrong over the situation than you think, and you have to get out of your ego and remember that in nature is brutal, and nature might not want you to survive whatever you're going through as much as you think. And just the tiniest little pine needle can cause an accident that could be fatal to you if you're already not looking out for your best interests. So you have to be careful. Okay? So that's one thing to say about the hiking, because I don't think it's on any of these other ones. And that is that nature doesn't want you to survive as much as you think they do. It does, right? Nature doesn't have emotions. Trees are not friendly. Weather is not kind. People are not, but like just the terrain is not sensible. It's not predictive. Cakes, that's where, remember I told you about distancing in the first one. So people think, I don't know if I should take this. People think that.
Okay, here the stalker tends to make a lot of noise, and I don't know why he's doing this. But the category is short distance away deaths. So deaths where the body is either found not very far away from their homes, or where the body is found not very far away from their family members. Okay?
This is a big one for Daisy Cakes. Deaths where.
But try to listen through the noise, because I actually like how I said it the first time, and I don't know what's wrong with these people. They're being really, really awful, and there's no reason for it. They're just, it's like, I don't know, like, how do you get to this level of hate of someone just because of the color of their skin? It's crazy.
Remember I told you about distancing in the first one. So people think.
This is the stalker, not me, y'all.
So the portals remind me. So people think.
That's not me. That's the stalker sampling in part of my thing.
People think that there's criminals, especially familial criminals, with varying levels of intelligence.
Okay, this is me really talking to you, but the stalker is sampling in noises, and I don't know why they're doing that, y'all.
And one of the things that they think is that if I'm not standing right next to the body, then I didn't kill the person. And this is something that you see a lot. And then you'll see it.
Because remember, I told you that people think that distancing is an important part of getting away with a crime. Okay?
Children are generally right next to their parents. And that's why when something happens to a child, it is usually often a family. Okay? But not always. But usually the family member is somehow the cause of the risky situation through lack of supervision or other kind of things. But since we're not beating up people in this thing, we're not going to really go into that too much, okay? But short distance away deaths. People often will return to the scene of a crime to see what's happening, like arsonists are famous for this, but also other people. And so we might see them monitoring the news or paying attention to things or sort of, presenting themselves. Like I said, whoever seems to care the most about how they look after these things happen is often involved, unfortunately, depending on the situation. But you have kind of a gut feeling. You should always listen to that because your gut knows more than you do about situations. So short distance away death. So if someone dies like outside in the yard and the family goes inside the house and acts surprised, that's a thing, right? If they die, or vice versa, if the person dies in the house and they're like all of a sudden at dinner, then perhaps the person was dead already. Okay. If the child is found a short distance away from the house, that's usually a sign that it had something to do with the immediate family because they care enough about the child to keep them close to them. But obviously the child was unalive somehow. But they may not have the right person. I mean, it's quite possible. Like I said, life is like a party. People come in and leave very quickly sometimes. And so you don't really know for sure who was there. No matter what you might think, there could be a person X that you don't know about somewhere in the horizon that's causing all of the troubles. And that's why it's so important to do follow-up and go back and check on these people and make sure that they're not still being abused by someone. Because deaths occurring in and around the house are domestic abuse things, and they should be investigated as like that as well, including looking at all the family members and things like that. Because when someone dies, like I said, we tend not to call it domestic abuse, domestic violence, but it is domestic violence when someone dies. And you shouldn't forget that there are other people in the household that might need those services given to victims of domestic violence as well. Okay? Which is a big thing for dating. So short distance away deaths, where the body is found, and if you plot it on a graph within like a mile or two, you can tell that the family is there somewhere. Now, this is also true in insurance fraud cases, like all of these floods where the houses kind of like slide off the foundations into the water. Then the family is like let's say most of the family is in a safe place and all of a sudden all of their stuff is sliding into the water. Then you could kind of wonder if maybe they weren't hoping that would happen anyway, stuff like that. Okay, so you have to be careful. Like I said, remember that where people are willing to commit things like fraud or deceit, that often some of them, a small percentage of them, will also be willing to commit violence, especially to cover up these things. And so you should be aware of that as well before you go dismissing some of these neighborhood dramas as not being important, okay? Depending on the people that you surround yourself with, which, as I said, I hope you'll look at differently now. Okay, now a huge category for Dayscakes is sports injuries. So injuries that happen during practice, especially towards the beginning of a game or practice, they might have been injured already, possibly through domestic violence, because men and women can both be victims of domestic violence. And you should be careful in ascribing it to the sport injury. A lot of people don't have medical insurance these days, and so when they arrive at school with an injury or arrive at practice with an injury, it's often, including head injuries and invisible injuries. So you have to watch for people to make sure that they're acting normally. Any kind of bruising that's fresh, especially around the face, especially that's not related to the sport that you're doing, right? Those need to be investigated. A lot of people take blood thinners now to get painkillers. So you might see them have an unusual amount of bruising for an injury, and you should be willing to wonder, not only because people that do that are probably being coerced to sell pain pills by their families, and so you should be willing to look into that as well, because that is also domestic violence, even if it happens on a playing field. Okay? So you should be willing to ask yourself these questions. Like, what does this do to? Was this a pre-existing injury? Was it an injury aggravated at sports that is a pre-existing domestic violence injury? Like, how did the injury happen in the first place? Because these things go hidden. A lot of people are encouraged. Like, I told my kids that they needed to do one team sport and one individual sport every year. And they did, and they had a variety of sports that they did, and they enjoyed them. And if they wanted to quit, they were allowed to quit, because sometimes, it means a variety of things. And if they didn't, neither one of them actually did the same sport all the time, which is kind of interesting, because they could have. But one of the, so I'll go into that on some other thing. I think I posted on Reddit. If you want to follow me on Reddit, I'm DaisyBell1313 underline. DaisyBell underline 1313 underline on Reddit. But I used to be DaisyBell underline 1313. And on that one, I talk about it a little bit, where the different sports they got into and how that worked out and how I think it was a good thing to do. But it taught me a lot about the other kids and their sports injuries and how many people are trying to get their kids to get into all these painful things and their pets, and how you have to be kind of look at things with a forensic mind and sort of ask yourself what you're really seeing when you look at these things, okay? Because a lot of people now are taking these blood thinners to get people, because remember, people that are willing to give people pain pills are willing to give them other things as well. And so one of the things could be blood thinners, and they could be trying to increase the likelihood of an insurance payout or other kind of big payout from some sort of company or business. And so you should be aware of that. Which is sad, because they can also cause strokes, blood thinners, and they can also cause joint injuries that are very difficult to rehabilitate from. They can change the way that your body tissues and joints receive blood and how they, pass it through or store it or whatever. And so it can increase some healing problems later also. But I would say stroke is a much bigger fear there. And so some of these deaths that you see on the playing field, where they just kind of fall over or have some sort of cardiac event, that could be due to trying to extricate them from some sort of situation that they don't want to be a part of, or it could be actual death caused by one of these contributing factors, and this should be looked into as well.
I don't know if you just noticed, but if you go back and look at the video, you can see on the bottom right hand that the stalker was using the assistive technology here. And so we'll hope that this continues to go as well as it's going so far.
So, as I said, sudden death. Because you have to ask yourself, these people, they have relatives that have already died, usually sudden death people. And you can't always keep your kids from being risky. I mean, maybe they really want to play basketball or football, and that's, their choice on how they pass away or whatever. But you also have to ask yourself about these families and why they're encouraging these kids to do these things when it's likely that those kinds of sudden death injuries can repeat. So make sure that you go into your family history really carefully, looking for these people that died between the ages of 15 to 40 doing something, usually. Sometimes farming or exercising in any way, shape, or form. That can be a sign that maybe your child needs to be a little bit more careful about what they choose to do for fun, but knowing that there's a limit to how much you can really control your children, and that they deserve to have these experiences that bring them joy also. Okay? So as I said, injuries at the beginning of practice can be hidden domestic violence brought to school or to co-ed, what do they call them? Intramural sports, especially where there's, adults playing adults, those kinds of things. You always look for that kind of stuff. Give a once over to people's legs and arms. Look for bruising, especially on the face, especially on, anywhere in the core area, their stomachs. If they seem super sore, you can ask them to show you their abs and see. Maybe it's not Maybe it's not like a 6-pack. Maybe it's bruising. You should check. Okay. So any bruising before practice. So remember, bruises go from red to yellow let's say purple, yellow, red, yellow, healed. Okay. So you kind of, especially if you're in charge of these people, you kind of want to keep track of, like what is wrong with these people? As I was saying, you want to make sure, it's so crazy. You want to make sure that people who have bruises, that you look at where they are and the different levels of bruising, and especially around the face, but also in the forearm area. Okay, and familiarize yourself. Teachers have to know these things too. So learn what a thumbprint looks like as a bruise, okay, especially on the forearm, especially on the top of the arm. And where you find a thumbprint type bruise, it looks like an oval, it's very distinctive, then look for the other fingers as well on the other side of whatever it is that you're looking at, and try to make sure that you report those or make a note of them to check them again. Okay? Don't just let it go. Even if all you do is make a phone call that can tell a family member who's domestically violent that you're sort of aware of the situation, and it can change that kid's life just with a phone call. So, and don't just make one, always make 2 phone calls. One to the person that you think might have done the injury, and one to the authorities. Okay?
Within reason.
Let's see, bruising before practice. Okay. The other thing I want to say is, remember we talked a lot about water, because I'm a lifeguard, trained lifeguard, but water, heat is like water. Heat can hide a multitude of sins. A body that is overheating will be sending water and blood to different parts of the body than usual, and sometimes it can mask some other problems. So you want to make sure to treat heat injuries, overheating injuries, or any other kind of injuries as if they are also domestic violence, because a inability to take care of your own needs in a situation shows that you don't have education in taking care of your own needs. Do you understand? It's kind of subtle, so you have to think about it. If you have a kid that's overheating, that means that he didn't tell you that he was hot. That means that he's not used to people responding to him in such a way that shows responsiveness to his needs, right? And that is significant, and it often gets overlooked. And I want to make a good point of that, because it's really important. If you have a kid, and you see this a lot with clothes especially, like let's say, but I'm going to stick with the heat, so I'll come back to it, don't worry. But like let's say you have a kid that has holes in their shoes, right? Their shoes are, their toes are sticking out of their shoes. And I've been there because I'm very poor right now, and I've been poor enough to only have one pair of shoes for like the last, I don't know, like 15 years. So I got like 3 pairs of shoes when my mom died, and that was like a big deal to me, right? But I have worn the toes out of my shoes, and I know what that feels like now. And I can promise you that when something like that happens, it means that the person cannot fix it themselves. So, I mean, it's not that I couldn't have fixed it myself. It's hard to explain. But when a child, it always means that they're not going to be speaking up and telling you when their body sends them signals. This is the part I'm talking about. This is the important thing I want you to hear. So whether you're an adult or a child, it's important to teach your children to tell, like a thermostat, right? You can show your kids different things that you have, like an oven that preheats and dings when it's at a certain temperature, or your car when it overheats and makes steam come out of the radiator. You can talk about these situations, and you can say to them, now, when you get a signal from your body that you're hungry, or that you're tired, or that you're thirsty, or that you're cold, or that you're hungry, or whatever it is, then you need to speak it. You need to open up your mouth. You need to say that to someone. And you have to teach them this between the ages of like 1 and 8 or so. If you don't teach them that between 1 and 8, the likelihood of them being able to do that when they're older is a lot slimmer. And of course, your part is then to respond in some fashion to that need. Okay? And I, of course, don't have a problem with my shoes at all. I mean, even at the time I was able to deal with it, but I still was like, wow, I actually wore a hole in my shoe. I can't believe I did that, because it's just such a signifier of poverty. And I was poor, so I mean, it makes sense. But the point is, heat, overheating injuries. When overheating injuries occur, it's a sign that that person does not normally alert people to their needs. And that is a sign of domestic violence and neglect. And you should pay attention to it. So anytime something happens where you have to notice the injury, like let's say they're guarding their arm, which is when someone holds their arm at right angles underneath their chest, so like around their belly button area. If their forearm is glued to their belly button, then you need to take that child to the doctor, okay? It's a big sign. If they do something like they cough and they instinctively curl up in a ball, that's another sign that that child needs to go to the doctor. It doesn't matter if it's pneumonia or internal injuries or a hurt stomach or exercise soreness. It's a sign that that child is not alerting people to the little alerts that go off in their body adequately. Okay? Any kind of limping and stuff like that, of course. I just wanted to say that because the last video, I didn't get into the domestic violence thing because you can tell it's like a huge thing for me. And so I wanted to make it clear. It's that adults also don't alert people as much as you think they do. So if you're a coach and you look at someone, even an adult, and they're not sweating and it's like 110 degrees outside, you need to get that person to the doctor. Not just some water, not to a cool place. They have to go to the hospital. It's very important. Okay? It's like a tsunami. When the water retracts and you know that that's weird and it's already almost too late at that point. When you notice a person isn't responding adequately to the exercise that they're doing, it means that their body has passed the point where it can safely regulate its own temperature and they need to go to the doctor. And not only that, that their family also needs to be investigated for domestic violence, because that means that that child is not telling people that they're warm. And that, if you think about it, you might see what I'm talking about. It's kind of a big deal. Okay? So deaths from heat signify a huge underlying problem in that family. And you should be aware of that. And it's not just because I've been trained in first aid, and it's not just because I'm really big on drinking water. I drink over a gallon of water a day. And I was a swimmer for years, and I was trained to stay out in the sun between 11 and 1:30 in the daytime just because of this. And because in Texas, the hot part of the day is usually like 4:30 in the afternoon, I still ended up with heat injuries a fair amount. And that was because, not because I was a little neglected, I should say, but kids just are kids, they're immature. And so you have to keep a watchful eye on anyone like that you're out, and total strangers, y'all. You have to keep an eye on everybody when you're at the beach or in areas where it's really hot or where everyone's exercising, like a track and field meet or whatever. If you see someone that is having abdominal cramps or not sweating when it's really hot outside, or you see them pouring water over their heads, especially, that person needs to sit down and in a cool place, like an air-conditioned place. They usually have tents that have air conditioning somewhere. And you need to jump on that before it gets to be a problem. Okay? And everyone's eyes are important in these kinds of situations. So not just the coaches, but everybody needs to pay attention to those kinds of things. Because what I'm trying to tell you is that some of these accidental deaths, they don't only signify that maybe they weren't accidental, or that maybe they were unalivements of the person themselves, but they also signify greater problems in the individual's ability to alert others to those little alerts that we hear, Like, teach your kids to say, when you hear their stomach growl, did they say they were hungry first? If they didn't, go back and ask them, okay? Say these words. Say, like, if your stomach growls, I need you to tell me that you're hungry. Now, that's a sign. I mean, a lot of parents don't want to say that because they feel guilty, like that they're not able to adequately provide for their children. But children's needs change. They can have growth spurts. They don't like to eat their dinner. Maybe they'd rather have a big breakfast. I mean, these are normal changes in a person. But so you have to be able to teach them that you're not going to get, like, self-flagellating if they say, I'm hungry, or I'm cold, or I'm hot, or whatever. If you see a kid shivering, then you need to go over to them. Or not shivering is even worse if it's cold outside. You need to go over to them and say, because remember, no matter what your brain might tell you about these kids that wear, like, bikinis in the snow and stuff, they are cold. It's just common sense and physics. They're cold. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why aren't they telling someone that they're cold? There's usually a bigger reason going on there that has to do with someone at some point giving them the impression that no matter how much they say something, their needs don't get met, or it gets met with a firestorm of, oh my God, I'm so awful, or whatever, instead of actually just dealing with the situation and feeding or wrapping the kid up or whatever. Because people, remember, it's not a judgment. I'm not judging, because kids have the weirdest growth spurts. They have the oddest temperature habits. Environments can change in a second, especially here in Texas, but also in other states. And so it's not about judging. I'm just saying, teach your kids that, like, if their head hurts, they say, my head hurts. If their mouth is dry, they say, I'm thirsty. If their stomach growls, before that, they say that they're hungry. If their arm hurts, they say that they're sore. But teach your kids to speak these things out loud, or point to a doll. If they have special needs, they should always have, like, a little doll person with them, and you should pay attention to what they're doing to their doll. Okay? This is one thing I do with all of my nonverbal kids. I always give them a doll to have, a doll that they like in some fashion. Because if you see that kid hitting that doll, that means something. If you see that kid putting food up to their mouths, that probably means that kid is hungry. If they're giving them a drink, it probably means that kid is thirsty. If they're putting a cold cloth on their head, the child may have a headache. And we shouldn't be any less responsive with verbal children, okay? Or adults, teenagers, especially the 18 to 25-year-old age group, especially people in your environment when you're in a store or wherever. Okay, we have to take responsibility for being observant of everyone that we come across. So if you're a spectator, use your binoculars, always take binoculars, and be scanning around these people and see, are they not taking care of themselves? Do they have an unexpressed need that you could help with? Is there some way you could tell someone or alert them to some sort of thing that could be on the horizon that maybe they don't know about? That would be helpful. Okay. So heat is like water. Heat covers a multitude of sins. And by the time a child dies of a heat injury, whether it's inside a car or at a track meet or at a football game or at the beach, it's too late to help that child. So you need to help them before they're sick. Oh, the other thing is abdominal cramps. I think I said abdominal cramps, but also vomiting is too late. If the child is not sweating and the child is vomiting or doubled over with abdominal cramps, it's too late. So try to be preventative and put kids in, like, every 15 minutes for every 3 hours in an air-conditioned environment of some kind. Take a walk to the town, go swimming, get sit in the ice cream store and get some air conditioning. Do whatever you can do every 15 minutes, every 3 to 4 hours for about 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. Deaths after some kind of criminal act. This is a big one. You see it often on the news. Remember that criminals tend to be selfish. They usually want everything for themselves. So if 5 people commit a crime, the chances of all 5 people splitting everything equally and being fine afterwards are very slim. And you should follow up. If you're in charge of things, I guess, you could follow up on these crimes where people commit the crime and see what happens, especially all these shoplifting crimes that you see where people run out with their arms full. They're probably not each going to take home an equal share of that, and you should kind of watch for violence that ensues after unequal sharing of things like this, profits from crime or things like that. So deaths that occur after some kind of criminal activity can be predicted. And I know a lot of times people think, well, that's just, the trash taking itself out or whatever, but it's not entirely fair. Some of these people are forced to do these things by their parents. Some people are forced to do them by their pimps. Some people are forced to do them in all kinds of situations. And those people need to be rescued, not prosecuted necessarily, okay? In other words, prosecution, the only answer for prosecution is prison, which does kind of solve their problem, but it also makes their problems infinitesimally worse. So you, when you're on the news, if you see Freddie in the back of that group of people that's running out of HEB with frozen turkeys between their legs, then, you need to talk to Freddie's mom and be like, hey, what's going on there? Does he need a job? Like, how can we better Freddie's life and keep him from having to take 100% of the risk and get 5% of the profit? So deaths that occur after things like that can be almost predicted because it's such a criminal enterprise already, and you should be aware of that. And I said I'm not talking about gangs and stuff because that's a whole different thing. Some of those rented families, and the ethos is very strong there, but you still need to talk to your children about self-protection and common sense, okay? All right, now, remember we talked about ways to extricate people from places. When you see these crimes happen where whole families are murdered, some very famous ones, in fact, and you can almost bet that that is part of it. Often, more than one person is involved. Often, how would you say this? Talk about the victims first. The victims could be more than one person. The perpetrator is usually someone that knows them, either a domestic servant of some sort or some sort of person that opened the back door or whatever. They're usually all gone at once, whereas in random burglaries and things, they're not. It's usually the kids get given to a relative. That's a sign that probably was a real thing that happened. If the kids don't get given to them, sometimes not, because relatives can visit people in Siberia or wherever they're hiding out at. So not always. But whenever the whole family is involved in something, and perhaps it's sensational in some respect, maybe there's children involved or some sort of event happens that's kind of dramatic in any way, shape, or form, then you can take it that person is trying to engender a feeling in you of certainty that those people are not alive, and that probably means that they might, which is good news, especially in a lot of cases. Now, let's see. Is there any minor robberies? Deaths that occur in minor robberies, especially home invasions, often fall into this category of people that are trying to unalive themselves for reasons that probably have nothing to do with experiencing actual physical violence at the hands of another person, but might have to do with the promise of it or some sort of other thing. Okay? So be skeptical. I talked about facial breeding. Carjacking. Deaths that occur in carjacking situations. Again, you have to ask yourself what this means about the person. Why are they being so risky? Why are they driving such an expensive car down the street? I can name like 1,000 streets, but I'm not going to because of all the racial implications to it. But, why are they doing that? What does that mean about them? Are they engaged in other risky behavior that maybe you should look into some other members of the family and make sure they're okay? Or what's going on there? Do they owe somebody money and that's their way of giving them their car? And then the person killed them anyway? I mean, you should be careful. So look into other things that have to be going on in the background. Maybe the person wants a stranger. There's all kinds of things. Maybe it's a divorce proceed where the lover gets the car and they're trying to get the ex-wife out of it or something. Okay? Be skeptical is my main message. Fights. Deaths that occur in fights. Yeah. I'm not talking about professional fights, although those certainly can be faked as well. I'm talking about regular fighting. Fights that spring up out of nowhere that involves significant injury or death to the person involved. Remember that most fights don't usually progress to this point. It's unusual. There's always professional instigators, like assassins, that can be hired to fight as well as shoot. And you should be and you want to go somewhere and something springs up out of nowhere. Okay? Usually there's rules to fighting. So they don't hit between the shoulders and the waist, usually. They usually don't, if you know the person, they're usually not going to go right through your face. Like they're not going to try to mess up your looks in any way. If they know you, they might pull hair of your woman or man. They might, hurt your limbs. They might try to, inflict some sort of tertiary damage. But if you're in the middle of something that you think is a minor thing, and someone goes for you in a big way, like they go for your stomach, or they go right for your head injury, okay? They go straight for a head injury. And that could include hitting your forehead with their forehead. Anyone that does that needs to cause you significant physical harm, and you need to fight as if your life depends on it at that point, okay? Because that is a sign that person does not have any idea of not causing you lasting damage, and that's a big deal, okay? And that's why I'm not talking about where someone pulls a knife out also. Okay, we're not talking about West Side Story. I'm talking to all of y'all because YouTube is full of people that get in these kinds of situations sometimes. And you need to know the difference, and you need to teach your children the difference between a fight with someone that is angry with you and a fight with someone who wants to kill you, because those are two completely different things. And not knowing the difference can cause your kids to innocently step up to defend their girlfriend or boyfriend and end up losing their lives because they're dealing with someone that was intending to kill them the whole time, and they just didn't know. So how do you know the difference? Well, the way that you know the difference is by not getting in the situation in the first place. Of course, it's a Pollyanna answer, but that's not always possible. You need to understand that sometimes men goad women to fight with other men on purpose because their goal is to kill them. Okay? Maybe they know them. Always be extremely careful of engaging in any kind of violence with someone that you know. That's not normal, y'all. That means something. And it's sometimes not an accident. So the best thing to do in any kind of physical altercation with someone that you know is always to walk away. Now, if you can't do that, the main thing that you look for is someone wanting to hurt you, like more than just a punch, right? Most people fight to end the fight. If the person isn't fighting to end the fight, but fighting to kill you, you will notice that they go for your head almost right away. Their intent is to knock you out, not just punch you in the stomach and make you double over and vomit or whatever, okay? Anyone that goes for your head should be treated as a significant danger, and you should try to get out of that fight as soon as possible. Okay? Anyone that tries to... It's hard to explain. It's people that take you down, but they don't stop. Okay? That's what you want to look out for. And by then, it's too late for you. So you need to watch for this in fights where you're observing the fight as well. Okay? Any person that gets someone on the ground and doesn't stop is a significant danger to society, and they should probably be arrested at that point, and you should definitely treat them as if they're a loaded gun and either get away or stop them as soon as possible. It's very severe. I mean, I'm not talking about silliness, right? I'm not talking about pulling hair or whatever like women do. I'm talking about actual physical attempts to make you unconscious. It's not normal, necessarily, depending on the situation. And you know it in your gut, okay? The other thing is, if someone who isn't involved in the disagreement starts fighting, that's another sign that something bigger is going on. You need to get out of there, okay? Because that person might be one of these people that's meant to cause significant physical harm to people and just likes doing that. And they should probably be in prison and not sitting on the bar stool or whatever they're doing. Okay. Now, you should look for people wanting to restrain you. Someone wanting to restrain you in a fight and still keep fighting is never a good sign, and that means it's too late for you, and you need to take immediate, serious, evasive action, including defending your own life however you need to. Okay. But you shouldn't let them restrain both of your arms, ever. Or both of your legs, in any way, shape. I just wanted to say that, because a lot of people don't understand. And they get this, and they still, in the movie, they still do this. It drives me crazy, absolutely. Because people don't show the difference between someone that wants to hurt you and someone that wants to kill you. And they make it seem so easy. And it's actually a huge difference. So maybe if you're in charge of people that are likely to be involved in these things, you could have these conversations with them, because you know more about it than I do, certainly. And I didn't raise any kind of fighting person. And so I would certainly like to have better people making videos on YouTube about how to tell the difference between those two things. Remember that people that want to kill you want it to look like an accident. And fighting is one common way to make things seem like an accident. So you should always be aware. Okay? Also, I was going to say distancing is part of this too. So just from the point of personal protection, if someone is trying to distance you from your things or your group or your family or whatever, then that person is suspect, because if they really cared about you, they would approach and not distance. Okay? And that may signify that they might turn out to be one of these dangerous people in the future in your family, and so you should be aware of it. And prostitution. Y'all, prostitution with men also is very common, especially, and it starts when the kids are about 15, unfortunately. And you should be aware of the signs of that. You can look those up online, and I'm not going to go into them here. But one of those signs is the inability to alert you to the needs of their body, like I said. That's a big sign. Okay. Prostitution deaths are very hard in our country because, like I said, we tend to treat people like they're disposable in this country. And people do say things like, oh, it's the trash taking themselves out or whatever. That is totally unfair and incorrect to do. So, how do I explain? So, as a person, if you were human trafficked yourself and you were in this industry, then your safety, they say 65% of prostitutes have been physically or mentally or emotionally abused, okay? Probably in the 90 percentile for the other two, but physically, abuse 65% of them. That means that if someone abuses them, they're not going to tell anybody because they're used to it. So to them, it's like feeling hunger. They just kind of ignore it. So when these women die, it's important to find out. A lot of the times people don't want to know who did it because they don't want to know the problem exists in their neighborhoods or close to them or whatever. That has to do with social change, which I'm a big proponent of, and I will talk more about that sometime. But the point is that it's like skydiving prostitution, and to treat it any differently is dumb. Every time that you go out on a trip with a stranger, now this is a stranger, I'm not talking about escorts that have normal call lists or people that they like or common, mistresses or whatever, pseudo mistresses that get paid, whatever you want to call it. I'm talking about stranger prostitution. Okay? That's like skydiving. The likelihood of you living through it isn't up to you, it's up to the other person. So it's like, skydiving is like giving your power to the parachute. And I'm not trying to give skydiving a bad rap. I'm just trying to change how people think about it. Okay? Because it's true that it's fun to skydive and people live through it most of the time. But when they don't live through it, it's too late to do something about it. Because the situation itself is so risky that the second things start going wrong, it's almost guaranteed that significant injury will occur. Okay? And the only key for that is just to remember that that's part of it and not to romanticize it or pretend like that's not true in these kinds of situations. Okay, so to go along with that, then women and men found alone that are often put down to suicides, but could be domestic violence or occupational injury like prostitution or some sort of other thing. Okay, so you have to be careful and look into the whole environment of the person, their inner environment, their outer environment. And you have to remember that a lot of times these people are either not really dead, and I honestly, I could be totally wrong about this, and y'all comment, but I don't really think people get sold into, like, kidnapped and given to human traffickers as much in this country as people say, as far as, like, dead. Like when people say, oh, she died, but she's really, somewhere else under the control of someone. I think that's the way that families try to sort of ameliorate the situation in their brain so they can deal with it and not fall apart. A lot of the times these people really do die. People that are found alone. And sometimes they unalive themselves. And sometimes they were unalived by a dangerous person in their immediate environment. And that's my eternal soapbox to look for, is those ILPs. I see all of these pretty girls getting married to these ILPs, where it's not so much that they look like they would be domestically violent. It's like my mom, my brother. My brother's kind of not, but he's a decent. But his fist is literally the size of my face. Okay, and these people, the point is not that they are violent. The point is that if they ever chose to be violent, the chance of significant injury or death is huge, especially for children, especially for smaller women, but also tall women, And just remember, in famous cases, a lot of that is not true. And it's really people trying to change their identity or unalive themselves or get divorced or whatever. Okay. But women and men found alone, especially men, especially if there's bruising in weird ways, especially if there's significant money or power or control or disagreements or any kind of instability in their immediate environment, right? I did want to say one thing about the whole famous people thing. And this is going to be hard for y'all to hear, but I want you to hear me because it's important to me to say this, which I don't know if I'm even going to publish this mess, so we'll see. But, y'all, remember that not everything is illegal, even if it's horrendous or horrific or awful. And so people that get prosecuted for things, one sign that someone is doing something that they can't really get in trouble for, but that people want, and that the American psyche wants it to be something that people get in trouble for, is that they often will die in prison or be released on a technicality almost immediately within about 3 years of serving time for a murder. And this is because they're serving time for a lesser crime. But the public just doesn't know that. The public thinks that they're serving time for murder, and so they will either die in prison or be released, and this means that their time for their crime is over, and they'll probably have a new identity and be doing something else. Okay? This could be because they're law enforcement people. They're expected to sometimes commit a certain amount of things in the course of their duties. And so even if they get in trouble for things and have to go to prison, even some quite famous things, even some very dramatic things, they can't really be held for the crime because in their capacities it wasn't a crime. Either because of where it occurred or how it occurred or what was involved or whatever. Some things are legal places, some things are not crimes because of how they're committed, and yet sometimes those people need to go to jail or prison for a significant amount of time, and then they don't in the end. So you should be aware of that. Some famous deaths are divorces in disguise, and you might see the person go through a trial and run away to some foreign country or to a different location or change their name or whatever. These are the stuff of conspiracy theories sometimes, but sometimes it's quite true because for whatever reason they can't do things normally, so they choose to do this. People love publicity if they're famous. Okay, we can't always anticipate the creativity of the rich person and how much they may want to have publicity but not actually get in trouble or be doing anything wrong whatsoever. Okay? So perhaps they're not really dead, but maybe they are thought to be dead, and it's best to kind of just assume that they're dead anyway, even though your conscious mind tells you that that's probably not really what happened. And the key to knowing that that's probably not really what happened is that the person that perpetrates the crime actually doesn't get in real trouble. It seems like they do, but then they're killed or they're found dead in their cell, or they're forgiven on some kind of weird technicality or something like that. And sometimes a lot of money changes hands. I mean, it's very expensive to have these kinds of outcomes, and no one's getting into the whys and wherefores of that, if that's legal or not. But I'm just saying, don't believe everything you see. If it seems like it's probably not true, it's probably not true. And sometimes people die in the course of trying to create these publicity stunts, which they really are just publicity stunts, even some very well-known ones. And if they do die in the course of that, that's just one of those things. Okay. But I think that's all I want to say, pretty much. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I believe in common sense. If something doesn't make common sense to me, then what I do is I look for these things. The first thing I look for about that section of the population is I look for, is a great deal of money involved? Is it likely that this person was actually working for law enforcement undercover and is burning their identity or trying to do some other thing to move on to a different job? Did all of their family go with them? did they have some sort of weird, I'm trying to think if I want to go in order here. So the first thing is it kind of a weird crime? The second thing is it actually illegal? Like, what they actually did, is it illegal where they are when they committed it? Did they do it in a legal way? That's one of them. Then another one is, did they commit a crime and not get in trouble for some reason? Were they retried shortly after the trial? Did they have some kind of technicality happen? Was there some sort of irregularity that could have been easily predicted by people that know things in the past? Okay. Then, did they have someone else involved that survived that would be important to their lives if they didn't die? And did they maybe want to go and live with that person instead? And the third thing is, does it make sense? In other words, knowing what you know now, after everything I've told you, when you look at these situations and you see, oftentimes there'll be some kind of huge settlement paid to the family that isn't actually a settlement, but it might be kind of a payment of future expenses for the person that's supposed to be dead. Okay, that could be a divorce, or it could be some sort of payoff to disappear for that person. So that's one tell for people, usually. Or is the person that perpetrated it, do they have some sort of hidden money all of a sudden that wasn't really there before? Are their family members living very well after the crime, is another one. And there's just all kinds of things like that can happen, because the American public right now is very unstable. And I love you all. I want you to keep watching, and I'm not trying to insult you, but I'm just saying that the American public right now is more unstable a situation than it's ever been before in our country. You know, we don't have, like, I was thinking about this with Israel and Hamas, because, like, you could say, well, bring the people that you love in these countries to the United States, because they don't fight in the streets here. But you know, they're fighting more often than they used to, and there's a lot more instability in the streets than there used to be, and people aren't public figures are a lot less safe than they used to be. It's just true. I mean, it's being a person that's among the general public when you have a lot of money, or you're very high in the government or whatever, is like skydiving these days. It really is. You're putting your life in the hands of a lot of people. And so it makes sense that occasionally they may have to make these choices where they create these situations where definitive terminations are reached, either for a relationship or for a business agreement or for an identity. And for whatever reason, it has to be definitively explained to the public. And these kinds of huge crimes are a way to do that. It doesn't mean it's a conspiracy theory. All this really does happen. And it's fine. And I'm not listing any times that it happens, because there's so many of them. But it brings me happiness to know that they're not all together, always gone for everybody. Because remember, a lot of times law enforcement will go to a person and say, you know, because of this, that, or the other thing that has nothing to do with them or any dangerous family members or whatever, we think it's better that you end this identity and start again with a new one, and we think you should do it, you know, soon. And we have some ideas of how that might go, and, you know, here's what you can expect and what to tell your loved ones and all these things. And it usually means that it's quite significant danger, and that the American public shouldn't really try to figure out if they're still alive or not. And that's certainly not what I'm advocating. Good Lord. I mean, I wouldn't say, you know, I just wouldn't do that. It's not responsible. So do accept what you're told as being true as far as that identity not existing anymore, and more the impact of it on whatever impact it has on your life, because a lot of these fans are very impacted by these things, and so I guess they should be. I don't know. But anyway, do feel those feelings, and don't try to see if it's not true or whatever. That's not what I'm advocating. I'm just saying, in the future, when you get news, to look at it with a more critical eye and ask yourself not only if it's really true, if it's likely, or ask yourself if there's some kind of action you could take in your own environment that would improve your chances of not having to go through these dramatic events in the future yourself. Because that's really why I'm making these videos, is not to scare you or make you worry about me, because I'm fine. My goal is to make you see your life differently, because a lot of us are told that it's glamorous to associate with ILPs, and that they bring, advantages and things like that. But you have to ask yourself whether that's true or not, and if that really is the best thing for you to be doing. If you wait, a month or so, a different person could show up that's not an ILP that would be really great for you and might be perfect, and you should probably wait for that person, is what I'm saying. Please. But it's so hard to explain to people until you see it on the news, and then you'll be like, oh, that's what she means. I bet that's what she's talking about. That's probably a situation where that girl could have waited a month, or that guy. It happens to guys too. Especially, I want to say this before I forget. Guys get injuries, y'all. And we need to protect our men, especially 18 to 45, okay? They're under attack every day, y'all. These guys, these men, they're under attack. And we need to help them. We need to teach them to articulate their needs, to be around people that meet their needs, that care about them, and to watch out for these ILPs and these red people and all these other terms that I use to tell you that, not everybody out there has your best interest at heart. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Is any kind of immigration situation, whether it's bringing a loved one back from a country that's war-torn and dangerous, or having someone come in illegally all of a sudden and enter your community, I'm not saying to be scared of those people, okay? I'm not saying that they're a danger. But I'm saying that in any group of people, you should look for those ILPs, not just people that look foreign, okay? They could look like your Uncle Charles, or they could look like your father, and still be dangerous to you. You just have to kind of be critical when you surround yourself with people. And it's okay, and that's the other thing about speaking up, You could be like, oh, I really like, what is her?
What was that? Okay, so I'm just going to finish recording here and hope the microphone's on. So this is Daisy-Cakes. I'm doing the goth makeup gray today, and it's a lot faded now, but it was really fun I got a really good response for it, actually. So it's navy around the eyes and then gray on top of that, and I'll try that again. That was fun. So if you understand, I'm not trying to scare y'all. I just wanted to set all those out because that was kind of the ending. That's the stalker. Remember, he's like a little child. So I have to touch down here in the corner with my finger, and it still doesn't help. So we don't know why he keeps doing that, y'all. But anyway, the point was that 3 things. First of all, read the news with a critical eye. Secondly, accept the news that you're given to the large extent, because our job is not to kind of derail all of these attempts for these people to escape whatever they're trying to escape. Our job is to kind of reassure people that common sense does prevail, and that these crazy kinds of situations involving whole families or lots of money or whatever usually don't happen that often, as often as you think. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say. Is that whatever it is that keeps you up at night, whatever bugbear you have, for me, I mean, there's always the fear of something happening to your children or something happening to your loved ones or whatever. The best antidote for that is education, but not just in personal safety, because there's a lot of money in personal safety education. And a lot of what they're selling you is hogwash, but not all. Okay? Um, if you're a 5 foot tall woman and you want to go learn Krav Maga, then that's great. Go do that. I think that's wonderful. It'll be great for your physical fitness. It'll be great for lots of things. But I used to have a 5 foot tall daughter, and she would always tell me, look, Mom, I can do all of these things, because she is super strong. She used to be a cheerleader. She was very strong, okay? And I would say, Alex, I could pick you up and walk off with you right now. No matter, and I don't, because of course I respect your personal space. But I'm just saying I could, because there's just not a lot of mass there. She was, right now she's 5'2", like at this age, and she's in her 20s. So back then she was, in the 90-pound range. And I was like, Alex, you can't be safe enough to be risky, And this is the message that we don't give people enough, because we don't want to scare people. And I'm tired of watching all of these people get all of this advice about how if you spray this or do that, then X or Y will run off and not bother you ever again. And people forget that they usually have researched people before they try to attack them. They know they're not going to just go away and never come back. Usually they will come back, and they'll come back, multiple times, maybe to your house, maybe to wherever. So you need to be careful before you get in these situations, and still have as much fun as possible, and be as risky as you want to be, but just understand your actual risk, not the pretend risk that they try to sell you sometimes in the movies and things, but the actual risk that you're taking.